Chapter 5, The Last Battle Rages. Paterno Rinaldo. I rushed to get to the Emperor. The palace halls were long and empty, and I could hear my rushing footsteps echoing on the walls. Out there, on the battlefield, there was carnage. Something that I was not expecting. I thought that when the Nivens came here to negotiate, that was all it would ever be, especially since their chief hunter was now a woman, the wife of the Niven whom we killed in the Kanelan grounds more than a moon turn ago. Who would have thought that these Nivens had good military tactics in them? On the second day of the war, the soldiers who sided with the Emperor were still dying in larger numbers compared to the Nivens and their allies. I pushed at the wide wooden doors of the Emperor's chambers. Instantly, all eyes were fixed on me. The guards around the Emperor had their hands ready to draw out a sword. They relaxed only a trifle when they saw that it was I. "The King of Akea has fallen," I said. I heard a gasp escape a lady, and I could only attribute that to Saul. The Emperor's face was filled with fury as he stood up from his throne and started pacing inside the room. How could he have fallen? The strategies that we plotted were flawless. Circle the Nivens, then gut them all like witless fowls. At what point did that plan fail? His voice was shaking in a vain effort to control his rage. "A traitor," I said. General Renner Calo, who circled the Nivens from the left side, raised a different flag when he got close enough to the Nivens. This gave the rebels courage, and at the same time, they did not attack Calo's men. Instead, these Nivens rallied with Calo. "Then what are you waiting for? Kill him!" the Emperor ordered, shouting. "He has fallen too." Words reached me that the king, Ion Noto, had slain Calo before he fell in this battle. I paused. "It was Dogon Ronda, Your Grace. I have asked you to give me his head a long time ago, together with Lamare's, and yet, until now, all of the war generals have failed. Am I supposed to do this by myself? Have all the generals grown feeble? What of their powers? Can't they use them all at once to hand me the enemy's heads? With each general's death, I am losing the trust and loyalty of the provinces that they do protect. I have lost 4 already, and one of them a king no less. Do not make me lose another, Paterno." The Emperor's voice had lowered, but it was just as stern and steely. It was a hard task to bear bad news. "There's a way to end this war fast," Turan said. He had stayed with the Emperor since the war started, and he had been updating him about what has been happening on the battlefield. "Ravage them with your storm, Your Grace," I said. "The tree runners have already been sent to fight. General Copy Ribeir of Bulaknan already gave his orders upon learning of the king's death." "Do you fear that we might lose?" the Emperor asked. "If their number is an indication, it is not possible, Your Grace," I said. "But then again, they have slain 4 war generals, and we were unable to bring down one of theirs. If this goes on any longer, what was once our advantage could be lost to the passing of each day." There was silence across the throne room as they weighed the value of my words. It was Solarin Douglas who spoke. "It is not too late to call off this war, Your Grace," she began. "The Nivens only want to be recognized in this land. I say that it is a fair request. They're only after their right to live. Have you not learned anything from this, Saul?" The Emperor sneered. "The reason they stand here today is that I failed to vanquish their entire clan a long time ago. And now, I've given a chance for their fears to grow into hatred. If I give them the same chance now, they will go into their ghost town. For a while. And then they will breed, marry into other houses, multiply their clan, and when they have a much bigger army than what we are facing today, they will rally against the palace again, claiming the throne as if it is something that I've stolen from them. And by that time, it would already be too late. By then, they would have powerful allies. The support to the Kanelan palace would have been divided, and I will be facing yet another battle, one where I am no longer certain to win. Do you seriously lack the foresight to see that? When all of these people are granted their wishes, what world do you see unfolding in the next tens of moon turns?" To my surprise, Saul responded, "If you do not stop this war, you will have far fewer supporters in the next moon turns. The loss that the other provinces will suffer from this war will be your accountability, and the leaders of the other provinces will cease to recognize you as their leader. Just like Nivadan would, once they get out of this war alive. You will be left with just a few of your loyal supporters, and to ensure their loyalty is still with you, you will have to instill fear in them. But fear is not indefinite. It would only take another leader as strong as you are to sway your allies in their favor. And yet, if you stop this war, the losses will be reduced for those provinces who have already lost so many of their soldiers. Should you show mercy to the Nivans, the other provinces would remember you as a merciful emperor. If the Nivans do not uphold their end of the bargain, then you wouldn't even have to rally the other provinces. They would, of their own volition, come to you without you asking, because to them, the Nivans would have broken a sacred oath. She paused. Saul was looking straight at the emperor, who had gone still as though he was trying to make sense out of what she said. "What do you think, Paterno?" the emperor asked, looking at me. A classic response from a peacemaker. Great to listen to in theory, but quite difficult to manifest in real life, I said. The emperor gave a low growling laugh. "Always sound advice from Paterno," he said. "That is my answer, Saul." The lady Saul shivered visibly, but perhaps she had known that it would be the emperor's response to the case that she had brought forward. For days, she had been trying to stop the emperor from waging war with the Nivans, but he had disagreed with her. "Let us finish this war, Tehran," he said. He turned to me and said, "Call all the war generals. No one will sleep tonight. We will avenge all the 4 generals, and by dawn, the Nivans and their allies would have perished. Do not let them see the daylight." I nodded and rushed out to summon the rest of the war generals. There will be no rest for tonight. There were occasional tremors that could be felt inside the palace that were brought about by the fighting outside. I peered outside the window to see what was happening. The gates had been opened to let out the tree runners. Across the Kanelan gates, I could see the Nivan troops. They were almost by the wall already. If the tree runners are unable to push them back, they will be able to enter the Kanelan palace before sunset. Kino Amark. Master Romeo was fighting several guards at once. Pyper was beside me, helping me out as I battled with soldiers who were attacking me. I saw Pyper vanish into thin air, and I did the same while thrusting my sword against anyone who came close to me. From out of nowhere, a sword swung by close to me, almost gashing my shoulder blade, but I was quick to evade. I then dashed towards a big burly soldier and swung with all my might at him. He fell, and Pyper came rushing in, thrusting a knife into the man's heart. "Oh, how war changes people. Let's go!" I shouted. Pyper was immediately behind me. I was panting now because using too much of my shuffling does that. It made me weak, and so, just like all the other Akeans, I had to rest. But invisibility did not make me as tired because it required less effort, unlike hauling boulders or sword fighting. But we will tire eventually, too. Not too soon, I hope. We ran closer to the Kanelan gates. When it opens, we have to run inside quickly and find Master Jor, Goami, and Quila. Together, against the Emperor, we might stand a chance. Since Mayo could not make himself invisible, he decided that it would be best for him to stay in the camps with Mother and Mistress Laren. He could help tend the sick and wounded. He changed his mind several times about fighting or staying in the camp, but Pyper pointed out that his power could be better used in the camps rather than on the field. He obliged eventually. I could hear the metal gears of the Kanelan gates as they were opened. I could see the insides of the Kanelan walls, and my eyes landed on the tree runners that were lined up to go outside. "Pyper," I said, hoping that she was also watching the tree runners. "It's our turn to go inside." "They would know," she said. "They would sense me. And they might sense you too. Remember, they claimed you as theirs when you copied their powers." "We'll find out once we're near them, so let's," I said. I ran towards the gates, avoiding the fighting that was happening all around me. It was difficult to do because there were too many soldiers parrying against each other. Slipping through them seemed as dangerous a feat as actually fighting one of them. When I reached the walls, I stopped, searching for Pyper's gooey figure. "Pyper?" Where are you? I asked. Here, she said softly. Hide yourself behind the soldiers so the tree runners won't be able to smell you. They wouldn't know we're nearby. She was probably right, because when I tried to sniff some scent to figure out where Quila could be, it was difficult to do so. It seemed that any memory of Quila's scent was immediately downed by the scent of a mix of Kanelan soldiers and Nivan fighters. Both did not smell so pleasantly after a whole day of fighting. When the last of the tree runners are out, we will run towards the gate and make it inside, I said. The tree runners were prancing as they went out, some were wielding swords while others had axes, and still, others were not holding on to anything at all. I figured that their mere might was enough to put the enemies at bay. It's time, I said in a slightly louder whisper. Pyper squeezed my hand tightly before releasing it and pressed forward. But it was a difficult climb as the soldiers had already begun to close the gates. I ran after her and climbed at the gates, but it was already tilted so that it was already impossible for us to climb. Kino! Pyper shouted as she lost her footing and fell down to the ground, directly in front of the Kanelan gates. I was already high up on the wooden gates, but then at the last minute, I lost my footing and fell beside Pyper, who was already standing now. She reached out a hand to me, which I gladly took. Then we ran towards the side to make sure that no one noticed us. We missed our chance, Pyper said worriedly. Change of plans. We can't just wait for the gates to open again, I said. I wish I could see Pyper's face, because if I could, I knew I would see the sparkle in her eyes as she thought of another amazing plan to enter the Kanelan gates. Let's ride the cloud just like you said, she paused before adding, invisible. All right, I said. I concentrated and turned myself invisible. Then before I conjured the cloud, I thought of it being invisible too. Since Pyper couldn't see the cloud, I grabbed her hand. Hop on, I said. We were floating in no time. And we're on our way. Up in the sky, I could see the number of soldiers that still surrounded the Kanelan gates. The tree runners that were now fighting in the battlefield, and ahead, the Kanelan palace with its great white walls that shimmered even when Sisis was not touching it. The road was long, but it had been more than a day already, and Quila must be somewhere down there. Pyper, I need to know where they are, I said. Don't use sniffling, she said loudly. You're already using the Emperor's power and invisibility. If you use a third one, we might fall. I've read about shuffling before. While you can use powers at the same time, it will render you weak. Let's find a good place where we can land, and then you can use sniffling there. It was always good to have Pyper around. I smiled in spite of the situation. All right, I said as I maneuvered the cloud into a less conspicuous area of the palace grounds. I found a quiet nook in the Kanelan yards where there were not so many soldiers. Most of them were already in the front, fighting or, if not yet, getting ready to fight. This time, we were able to land perfectly. We did not hit the ground with our buttocks, but instead, the cloud gradually slowed and slid towards the ground. And I willed for it to stop, and it did. With a smile on my face, I hopped off the cloud and turned to Pyper. I grabbed her hand again, feeling the familiar sense of security whenever I held her hand. Suddenly, I remembered that first time we were on our way to the secret passage. When she was bitten by a serpetus, and I thought she would die. It was an awful feeling to be so helpless and to think that someone you truly care for could die. For no apparent reason, I felt my cheeks flush when I gave her hand a squeeze. We'll find them, Pyper. And then we'll put a stop to all of this. We'll defeat the Emperor's men. Or at least make the Emperor grant the Nivens, us, our freedom again, I told myself. We can stop here. Take a moment to find Quila and rest, she said. There were moments when I could see Pyper's face. I thought this only happened when we were not together, but this invisibility thing made me miss her even when we were together. It was an odd feeling, actually, but a good feeling just the same. I closed my eyes and thought of Quila. It was easier now. I could sense her to my northeast. Whatever they were planning on doing it quickly because it seemed they were already near the Kanelan palace. They're closing in on the palace. Even if Master Jor has power, Goemi and Quila's powers won't amount to anything much. They're going to need us, I said. Then let's hurry, Pyper said. As we ran, it struck me that Pyper and I still held hands. I could make myself invisible on my own now, so I could have just easily let go, but if this were the end of the world already, then I knew I had to hold on to one of the few good things left in my life.
Quila Tash. I have never been this afraid in my entire life. All I could think of right now was Arden, because I knew that he would not have let me be harmed if he were still here with me. And at the same time, because he had gone, I knew that he was counting on me to take care of his precious Goemi. It felt unfair that Goemi still had the people who loved her with her, while I lost the only one I was supposed to have. But all that is not as important now, because I will protect Goemi. She has been through a lot already, and I will not let anything bad happen to her again. Master Jor was guiding us. We have been in hiding for more than a day now, and we even had to don a different set of clothes to blend in with the Kanelans. It was a good thing that nobody knew our faces. I heard Goemi gasp in front of me. She was standing rigid in front of a poster, so much so that I had to walk briskly towards her to see what it was that caught her attention. There, staring straight at us, was Miroe's image on a poster. There was a bounty for his capture. He looked slightly different, with his hair tied up in a ponytail. If at all, he looked menacing in this sketch. There's no need to be afraid. If he's with the Emperor now, I'm sure that bounty is not going to amount to anything, I said. Master Jor was also behind us. He had a sad look on his face, and his mouth was set on a straight line. I pray that his soul is yet to be lost to darkness, and that we can still convince him to go with us. Let's not waste any more time, Master Jor said. I nodded and grabbed Goemi's hand. Come on. We have to go, I said. Goemi still would not budge. I noticed that tears were grazing down her cheeks, so I quickly grabbed the poster and folded it. Here, I said, handing the paper to Goemi. Bring it with you. We will rescue him. That's why we're here. Because when the Emperor is dethroned, we want to make sure that your brother is safe with us, and will not be sent to the gallows for hanging. Goemi reached out to take the paper and unfolded it. She looked at Miroe's illustration almost reverently before folding it again and putting the poster inside her pocket. A reminder, she muttered. Master Jor was already walking in front of us. We were lucky that we were able to grab a bite earlier. In this time of war, almost no one was willing to sell any kind of food for fear of a prolonged lockdown. But there were still the mercenaries who wanted to profit from the war, and so we had to pay extra silver coins just to get each of us a bowl of porridge and some bread to take with us. Water was provided to us, surprisingly for free. The Kanelan Palace was now right in front of us, and it stood tall and imposing amidst the three of us, so much that I felt like I did not deserve to be here at all. I wished Arden were here with me. It was his dream to perform here for the Emperor, well, at least for an emperor that was not wicked. Instead, I stood here without him. Arden would have thrown a fit just to be here. I sighed deeply. How are we going to get inside? Goemi asked as though she had read my thoughts. There's no way we can get inside now. It was Master Jor who answered. But we will need a plan. Perhaps we can make use of your power again. He turned to me with a knowing glint in his eyes. It would be easier this time, Goemi chimed in. He's probably as tall as the Emperor, so we only need a cloak. Have you ever seen the Emperor wear a cloak? He's always brandishing his clothes. He won't cover his body with a rag, much less cover his face with a cloak. No one is ever going to believe us, I said. For once, Goemi chuckled. Well, I don't see much of the Emperor, so I can't respond to that. All I know is that we have to try, and it seems like it's a good idea, she said. Master Jor was calling us, urging us to follow him. To where, I did not know and did not care. As long as we got out of here alive. Master Jor was quite a sight. He stood taller now after donning some considerably better clothes and a cloak that was made of satin. We snuck into one of the laundry rooms at the base of the palace and stole some of the washed clothes folded at one side. The new clothes were enough to make him look dashing. Not silk, mind you, but at least it was satin. It was quite an improvement from the wool that we had been wearing all throughout our journey. Are you ready? Master Jor asked me. Yes, I said in a shaky voice. I closed my eyes and breathed in, trying to drive my fears away. It will soon be over. I keep on telling myself. This is it. Arden will be so proud of me.
McQuinn Storm Aaron. I watched from the top of the palace as the war raged on the battlefields. The tree runners were out there already, and I could see my army progressing. I only needed a good general to lead them to ensure my victory, but with Ion gone, who could I trust next? No one came close to Ion, so it would be up to me to win this war once and for all. Miroe, now is the time to fight, I said as I conjured the cloud. Immediately, my troops and I stepped on it, together with Miroe and Paterno. We were swooping out of the palace now to win and end this war. All the Nivens will die tonight, and the prophecy of Micromania will no longer be fulfilled. Suddenly, as I rode the cloud and flew outside of the Kanelan palace, it came back to me. The past that I was trying so hard to forget already, but how could I when all of it had been a part of me? A story that my mother used to tell me. That I was named Sarsi before I was McQuinn Storm. How in the middle of the night, I had gone sick until my mother vowed to change my name. I was Wind then, mild-mannered little wind. Marcella, my mother, was my everything. I had not known of any riches then. Nothing about these tall structures and grand palaces. Nor did I have any knowledge of princes and princesses, or lords and ladies, of the emperor and his authority. Until I was 8, there was no day that I had not spent without my mother. Suffice it to say that my world crumbled on the day that she left us. But I have grown up, and I have buried all the good memories that mother and I had. She deserted us. She does not deserve to live. I felt relief and grief at the same time. Pain because of the reconciliation that somehow I wished I had with my mother, and relief, knowing that she had perished in Charisthea. And then, what of my father? That man who had raised me so to become a man of honor, ha! What honor was he talking about? He gave up on me even when I did not do anything wrong. I was just trying to persuade my mother to go home with me so that our family could be whole again. And my father had reacted as though I had done something so vile? There was loud laughter inside my head. Of course, he would punish you. You left a mare with a great flood. People drowned. People lost their homes because you struck them with lightning. Father gave up on me. The one who I trusted to protect me from the world was the one who let me be corrupted by it. And then there was Saul. Right now, she is not with me. She wanted to stay in the palace because she did not want to participate in this war. But what of her loyalty to me? What of the vow that she made tens of moon turns ago? She had vowed that she would serve the emperor. For this insolence, I could have her tried for treason. And when all this is over, I will do just that. And as punishment, I will make Saul my slave for all eternity. And yet, Lamare Ariston Amark is another to deal with. Although she has had a hand in my rise to power, at the same time, she will be the only probable reason for my empire to fall. There was so much to say about us, so much that we could have done together, and at times I think that maybe it was also my fault. No. I shut my eyes and drove away this nostalgic feeling. There is no room in my heart for a treacherous person. She was unfaithful and cunning and deserved what had become of her. And here she is, standing before my empire to wreak havoc just as Micromania foretold. She is not of Niven blood, and so for her boy to be a threat, her relationship could have been with a Niven. Krat, she was always in Nivedon. She will get what she deserves, death. I could already feel that this was the end. Today will culminate in either the rise or the total destruction of my reign. What of the boy, Kino Amark, whom I had initially loved as my own, until that moment he opened his eyes, and his nanny informed me of his green eyes. Lamare had betrayed me, and there was no other way but to banish her from my life, from Akea. But I made the mistake of allowing her bastard to live. I should never have. I could feel Miroe beside me. He was staring straight ahead at the battlefield. You don't have to worry, lad. All I have to do is call upon the lightning, and this battle will be at an end. There's no way that they could ever win, I paused, laughing. How could they think that with the tree runners fighting by my side that they could win? These tree runners are almost invincible to the sword. Sure, they bleed, but it will take a long time or a sharp blade to cut through their thick skins. If there's nothing to worry about, then why don't we fight them on level ground? No one will be able to touch you while I am beside you, your grace, Miroe said. I heard Paterno snort. That remains to be proven, your grace. Do not so easily trust anyone with your life, Paterno said. I dismissed them both. I will fight this battle now. Once this war is over, my men will be deployed all over Akea to instigate fear. No one will go back to their families for a long time. They must serve me well. Protect their emperor. There will be no more usurpers. Tomorrow, everything will be a brand new start as long as I annihilate the Nivens. I just need that assurance. If none of them exist anymore, there's no way for the prophecy to come true. With that thought, I glided the cloud that we're riding on downwards. We'll be in front of the battlefield in a few minutes. Your grace, please, not at the head of the battlefield, Paterno said. A leader must lead and display to his people his courage, I said. And with that, I called on the storms to ravage the land. The sky darkened as though there was an eclipse. Lightning flashed from the sky, and thunder roared. It was such a fitting display of my power to these rebels before they finally met their deaths. Romeo de Nicholas. What I had been afraid of has happened. The Emperor was now in the middle of the battlefield and was using his power to win this war. The land rumbled as lightning struck the ground, and thunder boomed in the air. While his soldiers were also struck by lightning, it was the Nivens who suffered most as their bodies flung in the air, both whole and tattered. Mangled body parts fell to the ground as loud explosions hit the battlefield. The wind howled ferociously and even that we had to battle against, but what use was it to battle such an indestructible force? For 2 days, we were able to put ourselves forward in this war. After 4 generals joined their ancestors, it would only be a matter of time before the other war generals decided to flank us together or the Emperor to attack us full force. And here it was, what we have all dreaded. My men had gone invisible and were running around to avoid the lightning. And in the process, killing 1 or 2 Kanelan soldiers. This is the final battle. I shouted. Do not falter now. The Emperor is out. He won't stop until all of us are dead. Fight for Nivens. Fight for all Akeans. For a moment, the Nivens flickered twice, thrice, and it was beautiful. It was an assent from everyone who heard me, and to this, they would continue to rally. I shouted as I ran forward towards a Kanelan soldier and slashed against his neck with all my strength. He fell down, eyes wide open as though unaware of what had just happened. There was another one who was parrying with air, and I could see the gooey figure of the Niven who was fighting with him. I quickly lunged and thrust my sword at the Kanelan soldier. Better to end it quickly rather than to allow my fellow Niven to get exhausted from all the parrying. There were other soldiers, and I yelled at the top of my lungs as I thrust my sword against them. Too much bloodshed, but it was something that could not be avoided. For as long as there were supporters of a man even when he was in the wrong, for as long as there were those who followed a wretched man blindly, there would be a reason to fight. There are those who will continue to fight a war. To stand for what is right. There are those who only see the insignias of the generals, queens, kings, and emperors. And then, there are those who are like us who despise idolatry. I slashed my sword, and another Kanelan fell to the ground. Even with the Emperor here, he was not able to douse a fire. If at all, he only encouraged us to fight on because we knew that we were at the last leg of our lives. Today, we are to meet death. It is written for us already, unless we defeat the Emperor. Then I felt someone clobber against me. I was thrown away and landed on the ground, surprised. I was invisible, and yet, someone was able to pinpoint my exact location to punch me. As I looked up, I stared at our brothers, the tree runners. They were fighting for the Emperor now. They could sense us in the same way that we can also sense them because once upon a time, we were closely bonded. Our love of the trees brought us together. But they had been banished to Sinista, and the gods know how that place can corrupt one's soul. I jumped to my feet and got ready to fight. I faked a turn to the left, then lunged on the right side, slashing my sword across the tree runner's face. He grunted, and I thought he was done for. But instead of seeing his head detached from his body and my sword dripping with the tree runner's blood, I saw him standing proudly in front of me with barely a scratch. It was a moment of reckoning, why the Emperor had gotten them for allies. These tree runners, while they do not look like monsters at all, were as hard to kill as monsters in old Nivan folklore. But if the Nivens rallied together, we could defeat them, I knew. Perhaps 1 to 4 of us could strike one down. I must give my instructions now. Then I yelled so that those nearby could hear me and started parrying with the tree runner. In moments, Nivens heeded my call, and there were 4 of us against the tree runner. But I could have been wrong because the tree runner kept on pushing against us, driving us backward. He was strong, and 2 of the Nivens that were fighting with me landed on the ground with a loud thump as the tree runner flung them away. I put all my strength as I thrust a sword to the tree runner's body, but it would not go through. Then I heard the consecutive sound of arrows hitting the flesh. I looked at the tree runner and found that arrows had pierced its eyes. It stood for a while as though it did not know what had happened before its lifeless form fell to the ground in a loud thunk. They are built to last. The only way they can be killed is if you hit them in an open wound or in a part of their body that is not covered by their skin, Laren said. She was holding her bow. That brief moment of realization was quick to pass, as there were soldiers all around us by then. I started fighting again, avoiding the swords, until one hit me on my leg. It was barely a graze, but blood still gashed out. There was no stopping now, though. It will be tended later, but for now, we must fight.
Pyper, San Diego. Kino and I have been running for quite a while now in an effort to reach Quila and her group sooner. They seem to be sneaking into the palace already, and they shouldn't do that on their own. Not without our support, Kino said. His face looked determined. He had grown so much since that first time we met. He was a scrawny boy who frequented the forest to gather fresh fruits and vegetables which he sold in the Wawang village marketplace. There was something about him that caught my attention even then. He looked shy, but he never surrendered to the bullies. And his kindness, that time he put ointment on my arm, and when he took care of me when I was bitten by the serpentess, are memories that I will never forget. He was wrongly pursued by the Emperor. He was just a boy then. Well, now he is older, and already a lad, and someone who seems to know what he is doing. Somehow, he reminded me a little bit about Arden. Kino is not as handsome as Arden was, but there's this charm that he possesses that makes me feel carefree by just being with him. I blushed at the thought. What do you plan on doing? I asked. Just after I said that, the sky darkened, and I grasped Kino's hand tightly. I knew what this meant. It was the Emperor. Kino was already looking at the sky the same way that I was doing now, scanning the horizon for any trace of the Emperor's whereabouts. He couldn't be doing this from the Kanelan Palace. It's just too far away, Kino said. Then he closed his eyes for a brief moment. This time, it was he who squeezed my hand. He's out there, he asked. What's your plan? I asked. If he's out there, that only means one thing: he wants to put an end to the war already. And to do that, he will destroy all of the rebels with his storms. The moment Kino said that, lightning flashed across the sky. Even though this was not new to me, I still froze where I was standing and grew more afraid. There was a time that he meant for that lightning to strike us, I said. He's not going to stop unless he has. That's why we must go there, Kino said. But before that, we need to find Quila first. He closed his eyes quickly, and when he opened them, he was already sprinting in front of me, pulling at my hand to follow him. I could only surmise that we were tracing the path towards Quila, Goami, and Master Jor Pasap. Quila Tash. The Emperor is no longer in the palace, I said as I surveyed the sky outside. He is out there. Master Jor was eyeing the sky with a grim expression on his face. This has got to stop, he murmured. Come with me, change of plans. Where the Emperor is, that's where we're going. We need to rescue Miroe. I sighed but nodded in agreement. I still think that Miroe did not need any rescuing. Heck, the guy could kill a dozen soldiers in one go without even touching them. If there was anyone who needed saving, it would be Goemi, whose power was as passive as mine. While I scampered after Master Jor, Goemi was likewise brisk walking after him. By this time, no one was paying us any mind anymore because everyone was anxious about what was happening outside and how this war would end, and if it would even end today. The sky is still dark, but I could already see the faint traces of Sisis's rays. In an hour, if I were still back in Lundu, the fowls would have begun to crow to welcome the sunlight. My heart thudded as lightning covered the sky. It would have been a splendid display if it had been fireworks like those in the Akene Wine Festival, but sadly they were weapons that murdered Akenes instead. Weapons that the Emperor was hurling towards the Nivens and the other rebels that sided with them. By gods, if I were there, I would have been one of the targets too. Goosebumps immediately covered my skin at the thought. I thought that we were already safe as we rushed back to the Kanelan gates and got to where the fighting was, but the soldiers finally found us. Rebels! One of the soldiers shouted, and almost immediately, they hurled their spears towards us. I dodged one, and it forced me to roll on the ground. Recently, I have found that I was running faster, and my instinct for survival has increased significantly. Goemi was running behind me, but with her long legs, she was able to overtake me in just seconds. She threw a rock against a soldier and grabbed my hand to make me run faster. I was panting by now. I clutched tightly at Arden's sword, hoping that I would not have to use it because, let's face it, even after more than a moon turn of practice, I cannot claim myself to be skilled in wielding the sword. Master Jor stopped running, and Goemi had to stop too. Right in front of us were some of the Emperor's soldiers, and from behind us, more soldiers were approaching too. Goemi let go of my hand and immediately took out her knife. I unsheathed Arden's sword, and the crisp swish filled my ears. It was as though I knew how to use it. It was courage that was powering the sword, and when a soldier leapt at me, I raised both hands that were holding the sword, and I was able to block the soldier. Then I swung it with all my might, only for the soldier to deflect me. Goemi leapt from where she was and struck the soldier with the knife that she wielded. It was enough to make the soldier stumble and fall, but he was by far stronger than Goemi and I combined, even when he was already wounded. He pushed at Goemi, and he was now on top of her. Goemi started screaming. Heat rushed inside my head as I remembered what it was that Goemi could have been remembering now. I growled fiercely and thrust the sword's blade at the soldier. When I withdrew the sword, blood gushed out. The soldier was dead. I grabbed Goemi's hand and quickly hugged her. "It's all right," I whispered. Goemi shrieked again, and I was not able to avoid the punch of a soldier coming at us. I fell backward but was still clutching the sword. Goemi was sprawled on the ground. I stood up quickly, and the surroundings swirled. Blood trickled along the side of my lip. My knees buckled as I put on a fighting stance. The soldier in front of me had put on a menacing smile. "When we're done with you, you'd wish you'd never been born," the soldier snickered. Master Jor was a good 8 yards away from me, and he was parrying with several soldiers all at once. My lips twitched, and I wanted to cry, but there was no one who could help me. I had to be courageous now. "Be brave," I could almost hear Arden say the words. And just like that, my heart was filled with immense hope that maybe, there was a good life that waited for us all after this. Just survive this day. Just today, I told myself. I gripped the hilt tighter, and when the soldier ran toward me, I met his strike with a block and struck against him in return. He was stronger, but I did not have to be as strong, I just had to fight smarter. I used my height to my advantage and swung against his legs. He winced and dropped his weapon. He grabbed it from the ground after a moment's pause and thrust it toward me, but I was quick to dodge it nonetheless. I turned around, arms outstretched, and slashed my sword against his neck. I gasped for breath after that. I watched as his body fell to the ground. All around us, there was fighting. Men, women, children, soldiers. Some seemed to be rebels like us. I quickly bent over Goemi and slapped her. "Wake up," I said. "Goemi, wake up." I raised my hand, and when I was about to hit her again, Goemi raised her hand to stop me. "I'm awake. I'm awake. What happened?" "We're still running for our lives. The world has not ended yet, but it could, any time now," I said. In that case, we'd better run, she said before pulling herself up. She picked up the knife that was on the ground. Come on, she yelled. I ran after her. The soldiers seemed to have realized that we were trying to escape them, and so one of them pointed in my direction and started chasing us. I ran, and Goemi did too. We got lucky that we were able to save our lives, but next time, we might not be as fortunate. Master Jor was running behind us after trying to create a diversion every now and then. I wished he had a power that was not passive like Goemi's and mine. I was with that thought when Master Jor turned around to face the soldiers. Run! I shouted. But Master Jor just stood there. And then, as the soldiers approached us, the ground broke as though the land had dried up. There were cracks everywhere, just like what you see during a drought, only bigger, much wider cracks. And then he stomped his feet on the ground, and land erupted up as though lightning had struck the ground. The soldiers who were standing lost their balance and fell on their backs, heads, shoulders, faces, with a loud thud. Then Master Jor turned back to us again and started running. I pulled at Goemi's hand and started running too. Then, wham! I stumbled and rolled on the ground. When I looked up, Goemi was nowhere in sight. I panicked. Goemi? I shouted. And then I saw her. She was trying to stand up. There was another batch of soldiers attacking her. What should I do? This time, my courage alone would not be able to save her.
Kino Amark. There! I yelled. Quila! We're here! I pushed at the cloud that Pyper and I were riding on and made myself visible so that Quila could see us. Pyper did the same. I could see her face from the corner of my eye, and her mouth was in a straight line. Grab her hand when we pass by them, I said. Pyper nodded. Now! I yelled. Pyper grabbed Quila's hand while I reached down to grab her waist. It was so quick that everything happened in a millisecond. Then Pyper made herself invisible with Quila along with her. Goemi, Quila said. We have to rescue her. That was the plan. Goemi was surrounded by the soldiers, so we had to create a distraction. Pyper leapt down the cloud when we were close to Goemi and poked the shoulder of one of the soldiers. When he looked around, Pyper made her head visible, so it seemed as though her head was floating in the air. Boo! She said. The soldier, who was almost twice our age, jumped back, and this gave us enough space to squeeze in while still riding the cloud. Hold on to me tightly, Quila, I said. Then we swooped down and grabbed Goemi. We did all this while we were invisible, so it looked as though Goemi was just flying. Time to get Pyper back, I said. I found her gooey figure among the disarray and swooped down again on the cloud to grab her. She immediately turned Goemi invisible. When Pyper was back, I immediately grabbed her hand and squeezed it. We're together now. Time to get back to Mayo and then after that, find the Emperor. Not so fast, Goemi said. My father is down there. We must get him too. What happens if we leave him here? I asked. It was a crazy thing to ask, but I already wanted to leave the Kanelan yards and go straight into the camps beyond the battlefield. He came here to rescue Miroe, and my twin is somewhere out there, fighting alongside the Emperor. That's where Papa should be, Goemi said. I wish I could see her face. I wanted to remind her that her brother was a murderer who did not deserve to be rescued, but Mayo said that he was only able to escape the Kanelan Dungeons because of Miroe. So maybe, just maybe, Miroe might have some redeeming value worthy of being rescued. I see him, I said. Master Jor was being chased by soldiers. It would be more difficult to grab him because he would be much heavier. That, and he could not see us. I'm going to slow down beside him, and then I'm going to make Goemi and myself visible. Then Goemi, you will ask him to jump on the cloud. Goemi nodded at high speed. Master Jor was still running, but he would be caught any time soon. I pushed myself to make the cloud go faster. Then as we closed in on him, I slowed down a bit. Papa! Goemi shouted. Master Jor stumbled because he was caught off guard, but luckily, the soldiers who were chasing him were also just as surprised when we popped in from thin air. They ride the cloud just like the Emperor. A soldier shouted. Yes. I yelled back. Tell His Majesty that I got this power from him. Then I swooped down and extended my hand at Master Jor, who grabbed it. Goemi extended her hand as well. Master Jor jumped on the cloud just as javelins were hurled towards us. All of us vanished into thin air after that. Then we rose higher. The soldiers were left astounded at what they had witnessed. Pyper was behind me. You can make two people invisible now? She asked. My power had grown during the time that we were not together. Perhaps you can also do it if you practice hard enough? I asked sheepishly. Pyper shook her head. No, I've been invisible all my life. Wasn't that practice enough? If I'm not able to manifest that strength, then perhaps I'm not that strong. She paused. You're amazing. I blushed, and I was only too glad that we were all invisible high up the clouds, where nobody could see my flaming cheeks. But enough of that now. We were together once more. What was left was to find the Emperor and hope that when we faced each other, we would be able to put an end to this war. The sky darkened even more, and then it lit up brightly in spurts as lightning grazed the horizon. It would not be difficult to find him in this chaos. Miroe Pasap. A moon turn ago, I was out in the world living the life of a vagrant. I had nothing to eat and had no roof above my head, but then there was Goemi, my twin whom I knew loved me as much as I loved her. She was my world. When everybody else turned against me, my grandma, my papa, even those who adopted us, my last hope had always been Goemi, but even she replaced me with someone else too. And then there was Mayo, whom I had detested when I was traveling with him. He was the most selfish person I have ever met. And yet again, there was some kindness in him perhaps, but he still chose to be with his friends. Nobody decides to stay with me. And now I know that I have found my true place in Akea. Right here, beside the Emperor, riding the cloud with him and making lightning strike all around us. Nothing could stop me now. I can use my power, and I will have no reservations about it because the Emperor is going to be accountable for my actions. Not me. The Emperor himself. Just give me the word, Your Highness, I said. When we land, the Emperor replied. Kill as many as you can. I smiled and gave him a curt nod, although he could not see me. His eyes were still trained on the group of rebels below. There were not so many of them, and they could have been easily annihilated by all these soldiers here. How did these rebels manage to survive for 3 days? On the battlefield, soldiers were fighting against the rebels, and then to my surprise, the rebels vanished, but when they reappeared, they were already in a more advantageous position to kill the soldiers. The soldiers fell one by one as the rebels, these crafty Nivens, killed them. My heart thumped at the realization of how advantageous being invisible in battle was, just like my power, invisible and yet potent. I glanced at the Emperor. They're invisible, I said. How can we defeat them if they're invisible? The lightning will hit them, and torrential rain shall pour upon them. Then make it rain already. I insisted, almost to the point of panic. The lightning and rain will make it slippery for them as well as for our soldiers. I can kill them all if I wanted to, but what will become of our soldiers? They will die with the rest of them. I cannot allow that to happen. I need my army to quell future rebellions. The Emperor's face was devoid of emotion. I thought that he had no regard for his soldiers as long as he got his victory, but it seemed as though somehow, he still cared for those soldiers who were fighting for the Empire. The tree runners were also fighting, but they were falling at some point. 4 rebels fought against 1 tree runner to make them fall. If the tree runners all pushed together, there will be no rebels left. We can kill all of them, I said, almost shouting above the thundering noise. That is the intent, the Emperor said. But if we lose this battle... I stopped short. How could the Emperor think that we might lose? Your Highness, there's no way that we could lose, I began. Release me among them, and I would cut their number by half within an hour. The Emperor chuckled while he concentrated on hurling lightning. Explosions were happening all over the battlefield as lightning struck the ground. Have they not taught you in school that as you use your power, you also grow weary? He said. His face looked strained, and beads of sweat covered his face. Huh? I said. I have never used my power so forcefully before to feel this strained. Then let me kill as many as I can. Serving you is my destiny, and I have come here to fulfill it. You will, he said, devoid of concern. Then he flew the cloud lower until we were on the ground. We were right in front of the battlefield. The Emperor turned to look at me and said, Your turn to serve me has come, Miroe. Go and make haste. It was the command I longed to hear, and as soon as my feet touched the ground, I vowed that no one would stand in my way. I sprinted towards the battlefield, but I made a mental note not to stray too far away from the Emperor. To protect him was still my primary objective. In front of me, there were 2 rebels. I could tell by the way their armors looked, tarnished and dented. I raised my hand and clenched it in a motion that seemed akin to squeezing someone's heart, and then both of them clutched at their chest before falling heavily to the ground.
Lamare Amark. The hours went on, and this time, it seemed like there would be no rest for all of us. The battle will end today. Everyone had grown tired, but we must keep fighting. I felt anxious and uncertain about how this day would end, though. When we started fighting, I knew that there was a slight chance of us winning, but that chance blossomed into a hope that we might be able to take down the Emperor and put an end to his rule. Up until now. As our army got slaughtered by the Emperor's men, it dawned on me that winning this war slowly became a bleak possibility. But that did not matter. We came here to fight, and there were 3 reasons that drove us to. Freedom for all Nivens. To be recognized as citizens of Akea again. Wind could have been a great leader if he had not been consumed by so much power and self-love. This is why Akea is in such turmoil now. And to make things right for my son. He has power now. I am proud of that, but for the things that we suffered from Wind, the hardships that we had to endure. I need to make things right for my son once and for all. I composed myself and grabbed a bow. The only time that I held one was when I was trained in the palace. I had been taught how to fight even though I had guards surrounding me every day. Nevertheless, my father, Northsam, made sure that I was not defenseless. It was good that he made me do it. Now was the time to fight, not just by riding in the air. It was odd that when I could before, I did not change the course of things by writing them, and now, by gods, I wished I could do it. But I have no more power, not since Wind controlled it. The Karasthia volcanoes did erupt long after I had written it, which means that my supposed death could have affected the effects of my power. The armies are falling. It is time for us to fight alongside them, Laren said. I looked at her and remembered the friendship that we once had, which was rekindled because of the shared desire to put an end to the Emperor's rule. I am ready, I said. I could sense her anxiety, but none of that mattered anymore. If I come face to face with the Emperor and he will take me as a prisoner, you have to end it for me, old friend, Laren said. What you're asking from me is too much. I understood the desire to be freed from the Emperor's chains. Death is indeed thus far sweeter than to be held captive. But I will do it, as you wish, I said firmly. Thank you, Laren said. Must I extend the same favor to you? I laughed and shook my head. I will face whatever comes for me. The gods forbid that I would be taken prisoner by my former hus. I stopped short, and then after realizing that Laren already knew, continued, my former husband, I would find a way to get my revenge somehow. Laren nodded in understanding. There was something that was bothering me, though, and I could not go to war without asking Laren about it. As she walked ahead of me, I grabbed her elbow firmly. Swear to me, I started, swear to me that should I die in this battle, you will care for Kino the way you care for your daughter. I reached deep into Laren's eyes, and they grew misty so soon. She bit her lip and nodded, and then she threw both her arms to wrap me in a tight embrace. I promise, she said. And, she paused and swallowed as though she could not get her words out. I will do the same for Pyper, I said. Laren embraced me even tighter. After a while, we let go, and somehow, I felt better knowing that there was someone who would be there for my son if I ever died. Going into this battle does not make me feel so weary anymore. I sense hope, a light at the end of a dark hallway. We will make it through this. Together. Outside the tent, we were greeted with the break of dawn. The sky was littered with all shades of red and yellow, as though foretelling how the land was to be covered by Akean blood once more. Romeo was sprinting towards us. Dogan was following closely behind. The men are falling. Without any rest, it will be a challenge for us to win this war. The Emperor has soldiers that have yet to be deployed, and those who do not die in battle get a chance to trade places with those who have not fought yet. But for us, we're all that we have, he said somberly. His eyes were solemn, but they were very much alert. The lightning struck us and killed almost a quarter of our men. It was a good thing that the Emperor killed just as many of his men. If there's no news about any help, then it's going to be a slaughter again. Laren looked grim, but she was unfazed by the news, as though she had been expecting to hear this from Romeo. Instead of halting the battle, the Emperor wants to end everything today, I said. That's not what I wanted to hear from you, my lady, Romeo said. I want you to lead the women to go back to Caristhea if need be. Go back and take care of the children. When the Emperor banished his mother, the former Queen Marcella Benilda, it was there that he sent her, and so, if we lose this war, then at least we will know that not all of the Nivens died. There are male children among us, and when they grow old, we can still procreate. There is hope for the Nivens. Not even this war can end our clan. That is utter foolishness, I retorted, but calmed after. And yet, one that makes sense. But I am not the chief hunter, so my opinion is limited to my outburst. Romeo and I stared at Laren to await her instructions. After a while, she spoke. There are some among the children who could already make decisions and who are of age to tend a poultry and farm. The children will not go hungry, and if there are no adults among them, should all Nivens perish, then they will stand a better chance of surviving. But I must say no to you, Romeo. This is our fight. We will fight alongside all the men. Laren's voice shook with passion. Romeo did not argue anymore. I understand, Chief Hunter. Onto the battlefield we go, Romeo said. I looked up above and uttered a silent prayer to the gods. I searched for the biggest star in the sky and prayed to the mother I never knew. Perhaps this time, she would grant me back my power. Perhaps there was something that I could still do to change the death that probably awaited all of us.